this is, it's mentioned international affairs or the international relations, maybe a new topic. I think last time there was a lecture, but I checked with the ISL. They mentioned that they didn't include the question. And also, I think last time there was a question asked by one of the students regarding whether 2 questions will be available in the section 2. That's also I checked. Then they told in section 2, there are 5 units. Out of 5 units, they will select 3 questions. Maybe this time, 1 question from national economy and 1 question from international relations. So maybe only one question from international relations topic or the national economy topic. It depends on the ISL panel. Okay, then we'll start this one. Okay, anyway, we will do much as possible. This is mainly just to give you the present some awareness on the international affairs. Okay, here the expected outcome, they have mentioned role of UN and UN Charter, superpowers, neocolonizing, third world, main international conflict zones and their effect to Sri Lanka and other countries, globalization, world trade, role of multinational companies. Okay, there are so many other things. Regional trade agreements, SAFTA and SAFTA, threats to the survival of planet Earth, disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation, judicial use of limited resources, social harmony, peace initiative, war and terrorism, major constraints, then the human rights. We'll try to do much as possible. Here mainly nothing in detail, just to give you the overview of the these outcomes. And mainly I think after you hear my economic lecture, most of the things you can refer here also.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but we can see you.
Did you share the screen? We cannot see.
You can't see this. Sorry. Maybe it's not shared. No. Okay, sorry, I haven't shared the screen. Now can you see?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah.
Okay, these are the topics under the sorry, the heading should be changed, okay, because I have used the same topic. This should be international relations, and main topic should be the international relations, and expected outcome is role of the UN and UN Charter, superpowers, neocolonizing, third world, main international conflict zones, globalization, regional trade agreements, threats to survival of planet Earth, nuclear proliferation, some social harmony peace initiatives, major constraint in resolution, hegemony by developed countries, human rights issues. Here, there are so many things to do. I think this is, we can't cover it within 2 hours, but I will try my best to give you some brief awareness on these topics. We'll directly go to the topics. Okay, one is the United Nations. I think this will be a most important thing. The term UN, I think that was originated in 1942. That means during the World War II period, this United Nations concept was initiated by the that time USA president, and initially there were 26 nations. Then out of 26 nations, 4 nations initially signed a document, and that was known as the UN Declaration. That time, not the Charter, UN Declaration. US President, then the UK Prime Minister, USSR and China, they are the initial 4 countries who signed for this UN declaration. Then there were another 22 nations. That means altogether 26 nations initially formed the United Nations. Then in 1945, after the World War II, I think if you go through the history, you can see from 1942, I think previously it was mentioned 1st January 1942, 1942 to 1945, there were so many conferences, so many meetings, some declarations, some articles were there formed, but ultimately in 1945 June, they have formed a UN Charter. That's the thing. I think in your topic it's mentioned UN, and that means you have to know about the structure of the UN and what kind of thing UN is involved in, and what are the main objective of the UN Charter. Okay, and this charter was formed in 1945. The charter unanimously approved and signed by all the participating states, original members of the UN, constitution instrument of the organization. That means that's the UN Charter. Based on the UN Charter, that is define the constitution of the organization, then rights and obligation of member states, UN organs and procedures, organizations and the procedures. Here I am not going to go through the each and every item of the charter. If you're really interested, you can go through, but no need to go through in such detail, because mainly you should know about these 3 principles and the other purposes why they form the UN. Main purpose of the UN is to maintain the international peace and security. I think you can understand, or maybe you may heard how UN is involved in resolving these peacekeeping processes when there is a war between the countries, or maybe any threats. That means UN is sending peacekeeping forces, then humanitarian aspects, all the things. To develop friendly relationship among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of people, to help nations work together to improve the lives of poor people, to conquer hunger, disease, and literacy, and to encourage respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, to be center for harmonizing the actions of nations in attaining these common ends. Actually, this UN was fully functioned after the World War II. Then after the World War II means there were a lot of damage to the European countries and Asian countries, as well as the Soviet Russia. Then through the union, they formed so many institutions and they help to develop the countries. We'll go one by one later. That's the main concept. Based on the after formation of this UN, I think all over the world, these human rights aspects, then as well as the there were so many poor countries, then they are giving so many grants, so many loans to these countries. That kind of missions were started after forming the UN. Then the UN main principles are these based on the sovereign equality of all members. That's once you are a member of the UN, they are accepting the sovereign equality of all members. All members mean here countries. That means that's why UN is involved in these peacekeeping missions and other things when one country try to invade another country. All members are to fulfill in good faith towards the charter obligations, and they are to settle their international disputes by peaceful means and without endangering international peace, security, and justice. members are to refrain from the threat or use of force against any other state. They are to give UN every assistance in any action it takes in accordance with the UN Charter. Nothing in the Charter is to authorize the UN to intervene in matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of the any state. That's also, I think, that's the main thing. I think previously also we discussed, our country also had some issue. That means during the Geneva summit for the Human Rights Commission, that the Human Rights Commission secretary, they passed some bills against Sri Lanka. I think you may have heard about those things, but up to now, they haven't not intervened for our domestic jurisdiction. That means they are every time telling Sri Lanka has to show our willingness to show the whether they are doing the justice to the affected parties. That's the main thing in according to the UN principles. Okay. Then the membership, it is open to all peace-loving nations which accept the obligation of the UN Charter. The General Assembly admits new member states on the recommendation of the Security Council. The Charter provides for suspension or expulsion of the member for the violation of the principle of the Charter. I think North Korea is not a member of the UN. Maybe very few countries, I think around out of 206 countries, almost 190 countries are members, 193 members are in the UN. The structure of the UN, that means there is a General Assembly. General Assembly means it's like all the countries participating in the, maybe all the country presidents, or maybe a representative of the presidents, they are participating in the General Assembly. Then the Security Council, Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, International Court of Justice, and the Secretariat. Those are the main bodies of the within the UN structure. Then the General Assembly is represent all member states, each of which has one vote. I think whatever the resolution passed by the individual councils, maybe this Human Rights Council, to ratify it, sometimes they are referring to the General Assembly. Then each country has to give the vote to pass that kind of major resolution, or otherwise that individual councils, they can take some decision on important issues, example, peace and security, admission of new members, budgetary matters require 2/3 majority. Other main thing is the UN Security Council, maintenance of international peace of security, but there are 5 permanent countries in the UN Security Council. Out of that, that means China, Russian Federation, UK, USA, they are the countries initially formed. I think in 1942, they signed the UN Declaration, not the Charter, UN Declaration to form the UN. That time France was another country in that within other 26 member states. But they are having the veto power of veto powers. Normally, let's say in the Security Council, if all the members except the veto country not accept that one, that means if the one of the veto country voted against on a resolution, that means automatically that resolution is not passed. Let's say out of 15 members, 14 members in favor and 1 veto country in favor on that resolution, then they are accepting that resolution has not been passed. That means that's, I think there were some resolution regarding Syria. That means they want to send the peacekeeping, UN peacekeeping force to the Syria during the recent conflicts, but Russian Federation and the China, they use the veto powers against on sending the peacekeeping force to the Syria. Then UN decided not to send the peacekeeping forces. Then ultimately, there was an internal agreement like Russia and USA both. They will have their operations within Syria. That's some different agreement, but veto power having 5 permanent members, they are having authority to reject, and if they reject the resolution, that means whether all the other members accept it, that means it is considered as rejected. All members of the UN have obliged to accept the decisions of the Security Council. Then the Economic and Social Council coordinates the economic, social, and related work of the UN and the specialized agencies and institutions, 54 members who serve for 3-year terms. Then other main important thing is the International Court of Justice. The principal judicial organization of the UN settles legal disputes between states, gives advisory opinion to the UN, open to all member states, not open to private persons and entities or international organizations. That means country should put a court case. I think there was some, not a very recent, maybe that Serbia, this Yugoslavian law, that means Serbia, Herzegovina issue, there were some international court of justice, and maybe these genocide issues, those kind of things, those are referred to this International Court of Justice. But just that's one example. Decide disputes by applying international conventions, establishing rules recognized by the contesting states. This ICJ, I think it's located in the Prague, Czechoslovakia. International custom as evidence of general practice accepted as law, the general principles of law recognized by nations, judicial decisions and teaching of the most qualified scholars of the various nations. And membership of the ICJ, also 15 judges elected by the General Assembly and the Security Council, voting independently, chosen on the basis of their qualification. Care is taken that principal legal systems of the world are represented. No 2 judges can be from the same country, serve 9-year term and may be re-elected. They cannot engage in any other occupation during their term of office. It's like a typical court in a country, maybe like a Supreme Court in a country, but that is under the UN, that means United Nations, and only country can refer the case, not an individual person can't refer to that kind of thing. Okay. Then the UN Secretariat is there, Secretary General Office appointed by the General Assembly on the recommendation of the Security Council for 5-year renewable terms. That means sometimes Secretary General can serve 10-year 2 times as well. Administering peacekeeping operation, mediating international disputes, surveying economic and social trends, preparing studies on new human rights and sustainable development, informs the world media about the work of the UN, organizes international conferences, translate documents into the official languages. Staff is more than 7,500, and other main important aspect is they are providing opportunities to the majority of the member states, and also it's like an equal opportunity. That means gender equality is there in the UN affiliated institutes as well. Their headquarters in New York, and other main stations, Geneva, Vienna, and Nairobi, they are having different institutes are there. Then the UN Secretary General, symbol of the UN ideas and spokesperson for the interest of the world people, Chief Administrative Officer of the UN. I think everyone is thinking USA president is the most powerful person in the world, but actually when you take UN Secretary General is the most powerful person, but due to the present powers, maybe the economic or maybe the political and other powers, maybe you may think Russian president or the USA president is the most powerful person in the world. But actually, when you look at the UN formation, UN Secretary General is the most powerful officer in the world. Brings to the attention of the Security Council any matter which may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security, consultation with world leaders, government officials, representatives of civil society groups, the private sector and others, annual report on the work of the organization. I think his main responsibility to conduct this General Assembly, and during the General Assembly, UN has to show the annual report, what kind of work they have performed during that particular year. Then this is most important thing, UN Family Organization. I think when you look at the UN, no need to memorize what kind of how many people are there, how many judges are in the ICJ. Only thing is the basic principles, basic objectives you must know. Another main thing is the other organization, what kind of organizations, that means affiliated organizations. The UN Secretariat is there, then UN fund programs like UNICEF, then specialized agencies like UNESCO, WHO, then the World Trade Organization, World Bank, International Monetary Fund. Those are also initiated within the UN family of organizations. I think now just you can think about the WHO, what kind of interventions they did during this COVID pandemic situation, especially regarding to distribution of the vaccines. That means otherwise, all developed countries, they try to utilize majority of the vaccine by intervening. That means WHO intervene and they managed to distribute the vaccines to the African nations and other poor nations as well. That kind of intervention could be done by only an organization which belongs to the UN. Okay. Then we'll just go through the World Bank and IMF. I think IMF, when I explain just thing, you can keep it in mind that how now Sri Lanka is engaged with the IMF. First one is the World Bank. I think that World Bank was initiated mainly after formation of the UN. Their main objective was to rebuild the Europe after World War II. That means, that's why I initially told after formation of the UN, they helped a lot to develop the nations which was affected mainly during the World War II. That was their main objective. But maybe around 5 to 10 years time, most of the Europe countries and also Japan and other Asian countries which were affected through the World War II, they managed to develop their own countries based on the aid or whatever the thing. Then the World Bank mission, they have expanded to other poor countries as well. Mainly the poverty elimination, infrastructure development, building good governance capabilities. That means corruption, financial systems. I think when you go through our past history, you can see so many World Bank funded projects in the infrastructure development as well as the poverty elimination. That's the main thing, main 2 points. They have tried to intervene in countries, and also there are so many facilities they have funded for the maintain the systems, to improve the systems to overcome this corruption and financial fraud. That means transparent systems. To develop the transparent systems, they have facilitated so many grants and other things. I think our Ministry of Finance also, they have obtained so many financing packages to develop most of these systems in the government institutions through the World Bank aid, World Bank grants. That's a good thing, because when you have a, that means system, automatically that will eliminate the corruption and financial fraud. That's their, otherwise their main objective is to provide the systems. Then the IMF was formed similar as the World Bank, because during the initial stages, World Bank mainly looking at the different objective, but after the World War II, there were a lot of countries, they had so many financial difficulties. Because of that, they formed the IMF. IMF, normally they call it as the lender of last resort. I think now best example is Sri Lanka. I think before Sri Lanka, Lebanon also had a similar situation. I think now today also I watched some news, then I heard that Lebanon still having the initial program with the IMF, but in Lebanon, they clearly mention I engaged with the IMF after more than 1.5 years, nearly 2 years after the real impact happened. But maybe in Sri Lanka, maybe if, I think you may have heard most of the opposition politicians, everyone is telling we should engage with the IMF maybe more than 6 months before. But actually at last now we have taken a decision. Maybe now we are going with the IMF discussions. Maybe if we can engage with IMF program within next 2 to 3 months, then there will be some positive feedback to the Sri Lankan economy, mainly that will give a better transparency in financial activities. That's the main thing. When you go with the IMF program, other countries, other funding agencies, they may think country having some transparent mechanisms. Maintains, because why we have to go for the IMF, their main objective is for the to maintain the stable exchange rate. Now you can think our system, because now one thing why we are engaging with IMF to maintain the stable exchange rate. Still our exchange rate, maybe after removing the fixed exchange rate policy, that time our exchange rate was around 202. Now it's around 360, 365 within around nearly 2 months time. Then other main thing is to prevent balance of payment crises. I think hope now you can remember the balance of payment mainly due to the import. That means our imports or the government expenditure is higher than the government revenue. That's the main thing. Then when you engage with the IMF program, they will analyze the government expenditure and the government revenues, and maybe they will suggest to restructure the loans. Maybe that means you have to now think there are 3 accounts that they are explained: current account, capital account, and the financial accounts. Then you can think how they will engage to prevent the balance of payment crises. Then other main thing is IMF will say conditionality and structural adjustments. I think structural adjustments means whatever the loss-making state own enterprises, they will request to change their operating structures. Maybe one option is to privatize, like now our Prime Minister informed, like Sri Lankan, but maybe other organizations, CPC, Petrol, CEB, there are so many, then the transport service, they may request for the private partnership, or maybe why they are telling, informing or instructing these structural adjustments. They knew that once these institutions are under government control, there are so many government influences on the decision-making process. Then maybe they will have lot of employees, so many other things. They use these government entities for their political agendas and other things. Once they change these structures, maybe as some private sector oriented organizations, then their main objective is the profit, and then they will operate as a private sector entities. Then that's the way this World Bank and IMF, both of them are under UN organizations. That means those are not direct under UN. That means those are under the UN framework. Their main objective is to serve for the UN membership countries. That's the main thing. And then we'll go for the other aspects. Then this World Trade Agreements, WTO is the World Trade Organization. Actually, in 1947, after formation of the UN, they formed a GATT. Normally, that is mentioned as General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, was formed in the year 1947. They aim at initiating on international trade by liberalizing policies and removing tariff. But their intended aim, that was not achieved during that time. Intended to keep trade open and tariff-based barriers low, arose out of the failure to establish an international trade organization, institutionalized series of trade negotiations, because there were some barriers during the formation of the GATT. Then they formed a new organization called World Trade Organization. Their main purpose of the implementation of GATT was to increase cross-country trade in the world so as to reinforce economic soundness after Second World War. It is the foundation of WTO, because WTO formed based on the GATT that made open trade between nations, but also maintained some barriers for the benefit of all. That means their main aim is to promote the international trade by removing some tariff barriers, maybe the policy barriers. That was the intention of forming the GATT, but there were some limitations on the GATT. Then they formed the World Trade Organization. Here you can just compare the difference between the GATT and the WTO, but now at present, World Trade Organization is the institute who handled the international trade aspects. Here you can see some major concerns, but no need to go through everything in detail. This is just I gave you for your awareness. Here it's mentioned participation nation contracting parties. That means you have to have a GATT. With the GATT, you should have some contract agreement. But here, every member, they can, that means whoever the UN member state, they can become the member of the WTO as well. There are some other technical differences, but main objective is to WTO to have the trade, that international trade between not the between, among all countries by removing the policies and the trade barriers. Then some other terms. What do you mean by the globalization and the protectionism? Globalization is the word used to describe the growing interdependence of the world's economies, cultures, and populations brought about by cross-border trade in goods and services, technology, and flows of investment, people, and information. That means when you look at the world as a one globe, now just think about Sri Lanka. Now Sri Lanka is mostly dependent on the international trade among other countries. That means all majority of our essential goods, maybe all our consumable goods, those were either manufactured or we are bringing from other countries. That means we are mainly import our main items from the other countries. Now, and normally when we are importing, we can import from any country. Okay, maybe depend on the cost and other things. That means we are not biased with any other country. That means if we want to buy rice, we can buy it from India, maybe China, maybe Pakistan, maybe Russia, whatever the country. That means that means we are following through international trading mechanism due to the development of this globalization policies, and also not only the goods, then the services, technology, then the investments as well. Now, when a country wants to get an investment, other countries maybe but institutions as well as the government to government funds, that kind of mechanisms were developed mainly because of the globalization. Because previously countries who support for the USA, those countries got the investments and maybe the trade only between those countries. The countries who supported for the Russian Federation, they had their own trade mechanisms and investment mechanisms. Then the world had two different that means two powerful nations. That those powerful nations they try to control, but with the globalization now European Union become a one nation, but still you can see there are some issues relating to the Russia and other countries. But now European Union, I think more than 26 or 28 countries within the European nation, likewise African Federation is there, then SAARC is there. All these things were formed mainly due to the globalization aspects. Now at presently, one country cannot survive without other country assistance. Now still the exception is, you can see North Korea. Okay, still they think they can survive their own, but it's not 100%. They may not be able. Still, they are having some affiliations with other countries. Best example is now very recently you may have heard about the COVID pandemic spreading in North Korea. I think within after they found the first 2 persons, now more than 1 million persons were affected, mainly because they have not vaccinated, because they didn't accept the vaccinations from the WHO. And other main thing is, since they are not in the UN membership and other globalization trading agreement, they were unable to procure the vaccinations and other things. Okay, that's just the example, but it's an exceptional country. Another thing is we call it as the protectionism. In the protectionism, policy of protecting domestic that is two things you can see in the protectionism. Protectionism within a country, every country having their own protectionism mechanism. Now our country also, we are having protectionism mechanism. That means those protectionism mechanisms we are applying mainly to protect the domestic industries. Now let's say to develop the Sri Lankan own industries, definitely we have to restrict some imports. Otherwise, with the free trade policies, if we import everything, then definitely, since let's say these Chinese manufacturing processes, they are having very high economies of scale and their prices are very low. Maybe it's the same product if we manufacture in Sri Lanka, then our prices may be high, but we may have to keep our industries. That means we have to protect our industries within our country. Then we are having the domestic protectionism policies, mainly to prevent the foreign competition by means of tariff schemes. Sometimes it's a subsidy schemes for the local industries, tariff scheme, a higher tariff on the import products. Then you are having the import quotas. That means you are having a ban on the number of imports or other restrictions or handicap placed on the imports of foreign competitors. That way, protectionism can apply in a good way. And other protectionism means developing countries, they are having their own protectionism policies that will incite a trade war or decreasing global trade. That's one example is the China-USA trade war. That means USA, they are putting some bans on the restriction on China exports. That means China exports, that means imports to the USA. That kind of protection policies, maybe now everyone is talking about the Ukraine and Russia physical war, but I think previously everyone was talking about the China and USA trade war. Those kind of things, we call this as the protectionism policies adopted by the developing countries. Okay, and other main thing is now these developing countries, they adopt some trade barriers for some products. We'll see this one. Several wealthy nations, including the US, implemented non-tariff barriers to trade. These included tighter restrictions on textiles and clothing and subsidizing agricultural exports. This is one best example. That means they are having tighter restrictions on textiles. Normally they are giving quotas. Based on the quotas, now let's say Sri Lankan garment industry also mainly depend on the number of quotas we are receiving from the USA government. That means we may able to export only about that amount only. That means we may not be able to export more than that particular quota. Okay, that's a some way of protectionism applied by the USA government. Maybe they can say, no, we want to give the equal other opportunities to the other countries as well. But that's because they think they should not depend on only one country. Because they think their supplies, whatever the supplies to the their developed countries, they should differentiate the number of suppliers. Such actions decrease the ability of developing countries to export goods, especially agricultural products. As a result, many countries had limited ability to import the resources they need. That means another thing is the agricultural products. Now, European Union also, you can see they are giving some quotas for the fish exports, maybe the agricultural fruits and other things, everything. They are giving some barriers. Based on the barriers, and also they put some barriers, protectionism barriers for their exports. That means for the imports to the developing countries as well. Trade is especially important to the smaller economies of developing countries. So any restrictions could have devastating effects. The way protectionism threatens developing countries goes beyond the implicated sectors. It really affects the use of resources and distribution of resources. In addition, protectionism limits foreign investment, which decreases growth opportunities. That also they are now here. I think best example is Sri Lanka. Normally, Sri Lanka, previously, we were very much biased with the China. Then India also came into the picture. Then USA also came into the picture. Because of this kind of barriers, they are restricting Sri Lankan government to obtain loans from the, those are not direct influences, it's like indirect influences. Now, typical cases, when you look at the Sri Lanka, Trincomalee Harbour belongs to the Indian investments, and Hambantota port belongs to the Chinese investment. Now, Colombo port, China also there. Then India also now requesting one part. Then through this new fortress energy agreement, USA also want to interfere. That means these developed nations, they are trying, there are different mechanisms to control their investments. That means USA may say they may not give aids for the other sectors if they are not giving the new fortress energy agreement. That if the government is not going with the new fortress energy agreement. Same way, Indian government, now we are getting so many facilities through the Indian credit line, and they are giving so many financial aids to buy our essential goods. Actually, we don't know what are their conditions up to now. Okay, there are positive things in the globalizations as well as the negative aspects, as well as the protectionism. Also, there are good things as well as the negative things. Okay, then we'll just go through this SAFTA and SAFTA. Those are the South Asian agreements. Normally, previously it was defined as the SAFTA, South Asian Preferential Trading Arrangement, same as the World Trade GATT and WTO. That means this is mainly within the member states of the SAARC region. It reflects the desire of the member state to promote and sustain mutual trade and economic cooperation within the SAARC region through the exchange of tariff concessions. I think previously, if you can remember, these SAARC nations, actually then after that, this SAFTA was SAFTA, that means South Asian Preferential Trading Agreement, was changed the name, mentioned as the South Asian Free Trade Area. Then now it's called as SAFTA, came into force since 2001, replacing the SAFTA. I think after forming this SAFTA, these SAARC regions, they try to initiate a common financial that means financial policy. That means like euro in European Union. Here also they try to introduce some common currency, but due to this Pakistan and India, they didn't come up with a compromise solution that was not come through. Another main thing is there were impact on the poor countries when we introduce that kind of common currency mechanisms, then majority of the burden has to be borne by the India and Pakistan. But in here, main issue was both Pakistan and India, they didn't accept who are the leading country. But in Europe, when you introduce the European Union, France, Germany, actually in the European Union initially, UK also there, but they didn't accept the common currency. That means euro they didn't use, they used their own sterling pounds, as well as there are some other countries in the European Union, Switzerland, they use their own currency, but they are in the European Union. That's right, was there. But when they want to introduce that common currency principle into the SAARC region, that was initially discussed, but due to the Pakistan and India, they didn't come up for a compromise. That was not actually formed. It's like same thing like the World Trade Organization, but here mainly that will apply to the member states within the SAARC region. Among its aims are promoting and enhancing mutual trade and economic cooperation by eliminating barriers in trade, promoting conditions of fair competition in the free trade area, ensuring equitable benefits to all, establishing framework for further regional cooperation to expand the mutual benefit of the agreement. It could lead to enhancement of foreign investment among SAARC nations. In here, I think during this COVID pandemic, maybe if you recall, you can remember there were discussions among the SAARC leaders, and they agreed to form a common COVID pandemic crisis fund. And India, they made a huge contribution, and also Sri Lanka also, I think around $1 million US. But every country, they made some financial contribution, and they formed the common fund. With that common fund, they shared these vaccines and other things. Those are the positive things. But in maybe negative aspects also there, when we go for a competitive bidding, I think maybe most of you may have come across this kind of things. There are so many Indian companies, they are coming to bids, and let's say if we adopt these SAFTA agreements and everything at full force, maybe we have to give the preferences to the SAARC member countries for every bid without going, instead of going to the other countries. But there are, I think everyone knows that the quality of Indian product, or maybe some products, I am not telling everything, maybe sometimes, every time we prefer to get the products from European brands. But there are some concerns on the Indian product. Let's say if we have this kind of agreement, some negative impacts may come. Okay, then this is other things we'll just go through. What are the superpowers, neocolonization, and third world? I think here, let's say if you want to write a question, you should know about these concepts only, and maybe these questions may be not to define what you mean by superpowers, neocolonization, just the concept. And whenever you write something, let's say regarding, if you want to write a question regarding the objective of the UN and the UN Charter, you can refer these terms and what kind of things explained by these terms. Okay, that means you can interrelate all these international affairs, all topics into one question. Okay, that will give that you have to know about the broader terms, not in the detailed terms. That's the main objective of this discussion. Okay. Superpowers, world superpowers, also called global superpowers, are the world's most powerful nations. Superpowers assume dominant positions on the world stage and are characterized by their ability to exert influence or project power or aid on a global scale. Here, just think about countries having these superpowers. There are arguments who are having superpowers. Let's say we can clearly identify USA, France, China, UK, Russia. They are having these superpowers. This second line, I think the economic, military, and foreign policies of superpowers are watched closely by other countries and can greatly impact of the rest of the world. That's the main thing. If you want to define a country which is called as a superpower nation, and here just give a Britannica, they define superpower as a state that cannot be ignored on the world stage and without whose cooperation no world problem can be solved. Okay, that means now just think about this Ukraine and Russia war. Then do you think these two countries can resolve their conflict ignoring USA, France, UK, that kind of nation, Germany? Then let's say if the USA is a must factor for that particular resolution, then you can define USA as a superpower nation. Okay. The term global superpowers first appeared after World War II and was applied to the United States and the Soviet Union. That means those are the two factors. This term appears. Then the US and the USSR dominated world affairs during the Cold War. Cold War means after World War II. And neither made the move without considering the reaction of the other. That means during the Cold War situation, USA is monitoring what kind of actions Russia is doing. Then Russia also monitoring what kind of actions USA is carrying out. It's like a not a physical war, but it's like a psychological war between these two nations. Okay, that means to build up who are the main superpower nation in the world. Then other word is called the Neocolonization. This was mainly this term also first used after World War II, but here is the control of the less developed countries by the developed countries through indirect means. Here the two you can define in two terms. I think in here during the World War II, now USSR, Soviet Russia is a federation, and then they had so many colonies. Now in France also, they had so many colonies in African nations. Then that means these developed countries, they use their powers to control their colonies. It's like now after World War II, Sri Lanka had an independence. But let's say before that, we are also under British colony. Okay, that means it's like the same meaning, neocolonized. That means Sri Lanka is not a independent country, it's a colonized country. Indirectly, UK is controlling Sri Lanka. But at presently, let's say Ukraine and Russia, it's a typical example for this neocolonialism. That means Russia still wants the control of Ukraine, but it's an independent nation. Okay. Now let's say in a trading terms, China having a major influence on the African nations because they are giving, okay, maybe so many loans, so many infrastructure facilities, and ultimately they are controlling all their resources in the African nations. Okay, that's also a indirect neocolonization. That means it could be in a physical way controlling whole country, or indirect way controlling. That means indirect means they are controlling the other countries. Okay. Here it's mentioned the foreign, but it is meaning soon broaden to apply more generally to places where the power of developed countries was used to produce a colonial-like exploitations. Main example is the African state by the European countries. Still, you can say the Sudan, Morocco, let's remember the other country. Most of these African countries, they are controlled by the French. Okay, that means that previously they were under the French, like Sri Lanka under the UK, but they have not, after given the independence also, they are depend on French. That's why Mali, everywhere, French forces, they are sending French forces to, okay, maybe through the UN or whatever the institution, for the African nations, mainly European nations, they involved for the peacekeeping missions and other things. Mainly still they are exploiting majority of their resources. And likewise now at presently, China also exploiting majority of the African nation resources through their commercial agreements. Then other one is called the third world. Actually, everyone is think third world name was initiated for the underdeveloped countries, but that term was initiated during the Cold War. That means after the World War II. Then NATO and Warsaw Pact. That means NATO belongs to the USA. United States, Canada, Japan, South Korea, Western European nations, they were allied and they represent the NATO, and they called it as the first world. Okay, here South Korea, Japan also there, but mainly the NATO nations and some other nations who are linked with the USA. They were called as the first world. Then countries which are allied with the Soviet Union, that means China, Cuba, North Korea, Vietnam, they called it as the second world. Then countries which were not allied with the first world or the second world, they called those countries were called it as third world. But finally, this third world terminology was broadly categorizing the nations of the earth into three groups based on the political divisions. Strictly speaking, third world was a political rather than the economic grouping, but now it's a economic term. Okay, since the fall of the Soviet Union and the end of Cold War, the term third world has decreased in use, and it is being replaced with terms such as developing countries, least developed countries, or the global south. The concept itself has become outdated as it no longer represents the current political or economical state of the world, and historically poor countries have transited different income stages. Now actually we still call our country as a third world country, because now the definition of the third world mainly related to the economic terms than the political terms. Initially, it was formed, first world belongs to the USA allied countries, second world belongs to the Soviet allied countries, third world belongs to all the other countries. But now, after fall of Soviet Union, now third world definition mainly related to the economic terms. But here, now let's say, when you look at the, let's say, World Bank, IMF facilities, and when you look at the human rights violations also, majority of the things are in these third world countries. Then that's why I told, when you write the question regarding the human rights or the, let's say, World Bank, IMF functions, automatically you can relate these terms in that particular questions as well. Okay, then this is very important thing mentioned in main conflict zones and their impact to the Sri Lanka and globally. I think that's the most important part in the international affairs. Here, when you look at the international conflict zones, here I'm not explaining everything. They are, what do you mean by the international conflict? Mainly due to ethnic aspects, religious aspects, sometimes ideological, territorial, government, and economic aspects. Those are the main causes for the international conflicts. The first three are conflicts over ideas, that means ethnic, religious, and ideological. And the last three conflicts over interest, that means territorial interest, government interest, and economic interest. Maybe the now when you see there are 5 major international conflict zones identified by the world today. One is called the Ukraine. I think everyone, you know this one, you can read these things. Then second one is the Afghanistan. Then third one, Ethiopian conflict. That's also very much critical, complex situation in Ethiopia, but majority is not concerned because Ethiopian conflict is not a major impact to the global economy up to now. Then South Sudan, Syria, Yemen. Okay, there are 6 here. Okay, maybe you can identify some more, but these are the main things identified by the world. But here we will see the impact effects on invasion of Ukraine and their effects to the Sri Lanka and other countries. The Russian invasion of Ukraine deepens the existing global economic worse, mainly because persistent supply chain bottlenecks and associated rising inflation, clouding the prospects of smooth global economic recovery from the pandemic. Because this invasion happened after pandemic, that means every country is trying to recover the impact of the pandemic. Then we see what kind of impacts are there. The West, led by the US and the EU, swiftly imposed strict economic sanctions targeting Russian banks, their leaders, and state-owned and private entities, generating additional uncertainty over the economic outlook. Actually, in Ukraine-Russian war, other countries, they didn't physically participate or physically come to the Ukraine and fight against Russia, but okay, they are providing all these ammunition, arms, and other things, but their physical representation is not there. But they have applied trade barriers to put trade barriers they have imposed against Russian banks and other institutions. Such move will inevitably make payments for Russian exports and imports hard. The ongoing military conflict in Europe could not have come at a worse time for Sri Lanka, because our Sri Lankan economy also very much collapsed. given its own prevailing high inflation, rising energy costs, and scarcity of foreign exchange. Because there are so many imports we are getting from Russia and Ukraine, and we'll go through the slide. Immediately after Russian invasion, commodity markets rallied up. The Brent spot price of crude oil barrel reached to US dollars 105 for the first time after 2014, because Russia is the leading country who supply natural gas. That means that natural gas is the main source of energy for the power generation and for the vehicles. That means they use natural gas converted into the CNG, that means compressed natural gas, and they use for the vehicles, and natural gas they use for the power generation as well as the cooking and heating during the winter. That means for the heating purposes as well. That means most of the European nations, they depend on the Russian gas. They are the world leader in supplying natural gas. Once they have these trade barriers, there are restrictions to procure the gas from the Russia. Then definitely these countries has to switch into the Middle East countries for the their natural gas requirements for their daily needs. Then automatically global fuel prices, every fuel, that means not only the natural gas, diesel, all the crude oils, everything was increased. That means now country like Sri Lanka, we could not able to afford that kind of increase. That means not only the Sri Lanka, majority of the poor countries, they had a huge impact on this global fuel crisis. Similarly, the main thing is normally this Ukraine and west side of the Russia, that means Western Russia, that means near to the Ukraine, they are the leading wheat producers. That means actually Russia and the Ukraine, they are the world leading wheat and other grains. They are producing world market leader for the grains and wheat in world. And majority of the Ukraine grains and wheat, they are exporting to the African nations. That means most of the African nations' basic food supply, that will depend on the Ukraine food chains. And also Russia also providing so much wheat to the European nations. Normally they call it as the breakfast provider for the European countries. The Russian Federation and Ukraine known as a major cereal, fertilizer, critical mineral, iron and steel exporters. Western countries will be keen to minimize the spillover effects of sanctions on their economies. Like Germany, the major European countries heavily depend on Russian energy, making it necessary to exempt the energy sector from the sanctions, because that's the other main issue. Everyone want to put trade barriers on Russia, but major countries like Germany, Sweden, Norway, everyone is depend on this Russian natural gas, and this war was started during their winter season. Let's say if they are unable to get the natural gas from Russia, then definitely the people living in those countries, they will have a huge impact because they don't have sufficient heating capabilities during the winter. Then another main thing is a possible economic fallout will reduce Russian demand for foreign products. And if Russia cuts off natural gas to the European market, a likely outcome will be the recession. That means as soon as Russia cut off their natural gas, that means that means now due to the restriction imposed on the banks, these trade transactions may not happen. Then automatically they have to cut off the energy supplies. Then these European countries has to go and find out other alternative options. And we'll see about the impact on Sri Lanka. Overall, Russia, Ukraine account for 2% of Sri Lanka's imports and 2.2% of exports in 2020. However, both countries are vital import resource for wheat and export destination for Sri Lanka black tea. That means Sri Lanka is bringing so much wheat from these two countries, and our black tea, our major market is Russia and Ukraine. That means Russia and Ukraine purchase about 18% of fermented black tea exported by Sri Lanka. That means out of, let's say now, okay, maybe due to the trade barriers, we may not be able to export our tea to the Russia. Due to the war, we may not be able to export into the Ukraine. Similarly, 45% of Sri Lanka's wheat imports are sourced from Russia and Ukraine. Now, I think today also you may heard that 1 kilo of wheat flour, they have increased by 30 or 40 rupees. I can't remember exactly. Maybe they have increased. Okay, 40 rupees. One aspect is, okay, maybe the currency issue, that means our currency is depleting. That's one issue. Another main issue is the global price of wheat flour has been increased due to the shortage of world market production, mainly due to the Russian and Ukraine war. Not only for the Sri Lanka, that will, I think, today's, if you watch today's news, you can see there was a special remark by the UN Secretary General. He is indicating there will be a huge food scarcity will hamper the African nations due to the Ukraine and Russian war. That's a special statement he has made today, maybe yesterday. Now today's news, they are telecasting. That means due to this, not only the wheat flour, there are so many other grains they are producing, all the things, they are, now it's stopped entering into the world market, and there is a huge shortage of food supply chains in the African nations. And another main thing is now Secretary General of UN is requesting Russia to facilitate the export of Ukraine wheat and the grains which are stockpiled at the ports. That means he is requesting Russia to support UN to export these stocks now which are in the ports, at the Ukraine ports, because now all Ukraine ports are under Russian regime. They are requesting to export those things to the other nations, or otherwise to hand over to the UN to overcome this food shortage. That statement, you can imagine what kind of impact due to the Ukraine and Russia war to the Sri Lanka and all the other countries as well, not only the Sri Lanka. Okay. In addition, more than half of Sri Lanka's imported soya beans, sunflower oil and seeds, and peas are from Ukraine. Moreover, Russia and Ukraine are significant import sources for asbestos, semi-finished products of iron and steel, copper cathodes, and potassium chloride fertilizer. Now we want to get so many chemical fertilizer for our Jala season and next Maha season. But this war may cause there will be an impact to the chemical fertilizer as well. Okay, this fertilizer may be available, but not at the previous prices. Not only the currency issues, that means the shortage of fertilizer. That means as soon as you know the in economic principle, basic economic principle is the demand supply. That means if the demand supply is less, then demand will be more. That means automatically price will go up. Unless the Ukraine crisis is not solved immediately, the fuel and commodity prices can rally further. The inflationary pressure in the Western markets, especially in Europe, due to high energy prices and supply chain bottlenecks, major consumers' purchasing power lowering the demand for goods exported by Sri Lanka. Europe is a significant export destination for ready-made garments, tea, spices, and seafood. I think same thing like Sri Lanka. Now let's say if our buying power is less, then definitely people will cut off their expenditures. Maybe as soon as they need fuel as their basic needs because they want to heat or for the air conditioners and for the vehicle running, they use the natural gas from the Russia. If they have to get it from the other nations, then definitely those countries has to incur more cost than the previously. Then automatically that will lower the demands for goods like other products, not only from Sri Lanka, all the other countries. Sri Lanka should focus on safeguarding access to vital raw materials and food commodities. That means raw materials means you can see there are so many raw materials which are we are importing from the Russia and the Ukraine, and also our so many basic food commodities. And the other main thing is the globally responding to the crisis, countries are stockpiling grain and exploring alternate ways to do the business with Russia. That means countries who are having sufficient foreign exchanges, they are trying to buy more grains presently. That means wheat, flour, and other food items, and they can keep their stocks. But now in our country, we don't have sufficient foreign exchanges at present also. Then we will face a huge impact due to this Ukraine and Russian war. Sri Lanka has a limited options to mitigate the impact on already deteriorating food security condition and access to the raw materials. As wheat and rice are substitutes, high wheat prices may increase the demand for rice. That's also happen. Now everyone is consuming bread. Now once the bread prices are increasing, automatically demand for rice will be increased. Then prices of the rice also will go up. Okay, that's like a chain impact due to this aspects. Okay, now whatever the things you learn in the national economy, Sri Lankan economy, you can refer here as well. Okay? Then just we'll go through some slides. Shall we do for another 10 minutes? Is it okay? Actually, it's my fault. Okay, very sorry for that one. I completely forget today. Okay, shall we do another 10 minutes? Is it okay?
No problem, sir. We can carry on.
Okay. Then threats to the planet Earth. World has identified key 5 drivers of biodiversity loss. Main is the changes in land and sea use. Okay, that's the main thing. Everyone is thinking climate change, but that's the main aspect. Changes in land and sea use. Okay, that will indirectly related to the climate change. But the second one is direct exploitation of natural resources, climate change, pollution, invasion of alien species. Here, changes in land and sea use means people are using land and sea in whatever they are intended ways. That means they are actually exploiting the land and sea use. Maybe they are cutting, they are building infrastructure, so many things. Then direct exploitation of natural resources means, let's say, if for the mining, maybe the jamming, maybe some other things. Then also the use of oil, fossil fuels. They are exploiting these natural resources. Then other thing is the climate change. You know what you mean by climate change. That means the increasing global temperature. Then other thing is the pollution. Pollution is a major issue. And there are a lot of ways you can think about the pollution, not only the sound, air pollution. There may be sound pollution, water pollution. Same thing now I have explained something in the health and safety environment unit as well. You can refer those kind of things also. Invasion of alien species means, okay, I think we'll discuss this. The threats as extinction of an eco collapse, resource scarcity, nuclear arms race, climate change, global positioning, food system failure, pandemic diseases, uncontrolled technologies, overpopulation, megacity collapses, and linear land. That means these are the causes due to these major impacts. Climate change and air pollution has been a cause of major concern across the world, and it is causing damage to the earth by biodiversity. Invasive species can disrupt native species by introducing diseases, preying on native species, and taking space, food, and other resources. This invasive species may be some bird, or maybe an insect, or maybe some weeds also can be considered. That means now in our lakes, there are, you can see so many unwanted weeds are. Okay, then that weeds may spread all over the lakes, and that will major biodiversity issues. And also there are species, that means small birds, maybe the insects, they are causing huge problem to the native species. Okay, this invasive species exploitation, normally it's around 24%. Okay, then changes and land sea use, according to the World Wildlife Foundation report, changes in land sea use account for the largest portion of the threat of biodiversity. They have mentioned it's around 50%, because I don't know whether it's exactly 50%. Here also 20% is just they have given. That means they mentioned 50% of the main threat is the land and sea use. Then out of that, 24% from the threat to the from the invasive species, and another 13% from the climate change. Then direct exploitation of natural resources, pollution contributes the other part. That means the 13% from the climate change and air pollution, sorry, 24% from the this one, that means 37, 50, 87% from these four, and another 13% due to the exploitation of the resources. Here, main thing, I just want to touch this topic because it has been there, but this is a very common topic. Let's say, whatever the thing, you can elaborate whatever things you may have no. Okay, then this is very much important thing. Other thing like invasion of Ukraine, in fact, treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. That's a treaty. It's called as NPT. The NPT is a landmark international treaty whose objective is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology. to promote cooperation in the peaceful use of nuclear energy for further the goal of achieving nuclear disarmament and general and complete disarm. But don't think these two countries like USA and Soviet Russia, they will agree for the complete disarmament, but they will force all the other countries to disarm their nuclear developments. Here mainly disarmament means you can use the nuclear for the peaceful use. That's the main thing. Nuclear, I think you may know, nuclear is the most promising candidate to replace the fossil fuel power plant, because with very low cost you can generate a huge power for the electricity generation through the nuclear power plants. But there are consequences on the nuclear power plants. But let's say another main thing is nuclear is considered as a environmental friendly fuel. You can't say it's as a renewable source because renewable means it's like an indigenous resource. It's an environmental friendly fuel compared with the fossil fuel burning. The treaty represents the only binding commitment in multilateral treaty to goal of disarmament by the nuclear weapon state. This signature is from 1968, and this was implemented in 1995. A total 991 states have joined the treaty, including 5 nuclear weapon states. But you can see there were some countries, they didn't sign this nuclear NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. You can see who are the countries: India, Israel, and Pakistan. That India, Pakistan both having the nuclear technology as well as maybe the nuclear weapons, but they didn't sign the this treaty because they are having a I think historical grudge between India and Pakistan. That's the same thing happened to the introducing this currency in the SAARC region as well. These are the two major countries, main countries, they did not sign this NPT. And what is this NPT? That means mainly they mention 3 elements. One means non-proliferation. Second one is the disarmament. And other main thing is peaceful use of nuclear energy. I think that's the main thing. Majority of the countries who are not having nuclear weapons, but they are using peaceful use of nuclear energy. I think our country also, we are using so much nuclear technology things for the peaceful use. Another thing is the IAEA, that means International Atomic Energy Agency. They are the safeguards for the nuclear material and activities under agreements with more than 148 states. I think Sri Lanka also a member of the IAEA. I think Atomic Energy Agency is the entity who are dealing with IAEA. And in our case, you can see what are the other users. In our country, we are having so many other users, mainly in agricultural and food. I don't know whether you have heard this. We are having a Atomic Energy Agency. They are having a very big facility called gamma radiation facility. Most of these exports of when we are exporting our food products to the other countries, they are following this gamma irradiation functions to kill the bacteria and other harmful organisms in food. It's a food, it's like a food safety system. That means it won't give harmful radiation impacts. It's a world acceptable way. And also in medical aspects, there are so many nuclear technology images you are taking. That means including X-rays, there are MRI, so many things you are using the nuclear technology. That means in our country, whatever this radioactive materials using for the treatment of the cancer patients in the cancer hospital, maybe the private hospitals, they have to ultimately collaborate with the Atomic Energy Agency for the disposal of these radioactive materials, and we have to comply with the IAEA rules and regulations. Okay. Then other main thing is the space exploration, because nuclear technology makes deep space exploration possible, mainly the providing the power. That means you need the deep exploration of safe space explorations. You need more power to generate. Most of the things they are using these nuclear power generators, as well as not only the space. I think most of these submarines, they are having powered with the nuclear technology, because when they go inside the sea, they can't refill fuel every time. For the months they are staying inside the sea for the maybe the security reasons and other things. Another main thing is majority of the countries for the water desalination processes, they use the nuclear technology, and other thing is the nuclear power they can use for the desalination processes, because it's a continuous process. It need more power, and for that kind of thing, country can go ahead with the nuclear power technologies for the electrical power generation. But there are so many guidelines and so many restrictions, so many rules they have to comply when they want to introduce a nuclear power plant in a country. And other main thing is this HR case. This is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Here, that's also it was formed after forming the United Nations in 1945. You can see it was initiated in 1946, and in 1948 UN General Assembly adopts the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and this declaration consists of 30 articles. There are 30 articles. Here I am not referring to 30 articles. Here just I am giving some reference articles. Let's say if you want to elaborate the question regarding the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, just indicate there are 30 articles, but try to explain at least main key points around 10 at least 10 key points. No need to mention whether it's article 1, article 2, or article 3, but just think. Those are very easy things. These are not difficult things, because in here I clearly bold the main concepts. In article 1 it's mentioned equal in dignity and rights. Okay, that's a human right. Then article 2 entitles to all the rights and freedoms. No distinction shall be made on the basis of political, jurisdictional, international status of the country or territory. No need to memorize whether it's article 1 or article 2. Then article 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty and security. In article 4, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. That means it's like a slavery. Number 5, no one shall be subject to torture or cruel. I think most of the things you may have heard, but maybe you may not know whether that is defined as a human right. Okay, everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. I think now this is the main thing we are talking about at present. with all these protests and other things, we are telling we are having a freedom of thought, conscience, and religion also there, has the right to social security and entitled to realization. And other thing is everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment. That means no one can force to use whether by looking at your person, you can't decide whether you are suitable for this kind of job. That means it's a right of the person. And then right to equal pay. That means whether that means you can't differentiate the male gender. That means, let's say if you are doing an engineering job by a lady engineer or the male engineer, you should pay the same. Everyone who works has the right, just and favorable remuneration. This is same thing as the working environment. And other articles is mentioned right to rest and leisure. Everyone has the right to standard of living adequate for health and well-being. Those are the terms, just the main terms used in the human right declaration. There are 30 articles. If you really want, maybe after the exam you can refer. But for other thing, everyone has the right to form and join trade unions, right to rest and leisure. Now I think yesterday in the parliament, our MP Bandula Gunawardena, he mentioned that there should be a term to right to live leisurely in the home. That means that they want to introduce in a constitution. This means rest and leisure. No, in our mention, that means right to live in your own house. I think it's purely after this protest and other issues, but normally it has it's like that means if you want to live in your house, no need to mention it as a constitutional aspect. It's just a basic human right. And just go through these human right main things, because what kind of basic human rights. And this is another term. It's, I think, in your one of the outcome, it's mentioned just as what you mean by hegemony. These are just a term like superpower, neocolonization, third world, like a hegemony. Hegemony is the dominance of one group over another, often supported by legitimating norms and ideas. Here, not only a country, it's like a group. I think in our in Sri Lanka also we can find this. It could be a one social group or class in a society. I am not supporting the classes, but there in our Sri Lankan culture there are classes in our Sri Lankan families, among Sri Lankan families, and they think one class is higher than the other class. Then it's called a hegemony. That's the term we can use. This control and exercise subtly rather than forcefully through cultural means and economic power and rest of mixture of consent and coercion. That means this is this, and here instead of the social groups or the groups, you can consider China, France, UK, US among the 5 nations. USSR and US were the leaders. They references to conflicting ideologies, communism and capitalism. That's also you can consider it as the hegemony principles. It's like a one group. In a country, you can see some communist people and capitalist people. But that does not mean you are representing USA and Russia. But those are the 2 ideologies. Those ideologies same way these groups or the social groups, they are having some different ideologies. These things you can consider, you can term this as a hegemony. Okay, I think with that, my presentation is finished. Hope you may have understood something and just go through the slides. And I don't know whether you will get 2 questions in the section 2. That's purely, it's a decision by ISL, but whatever the case, if you get 2 questions in the section 2, you can write only 1 question. Okay, I don't know whether they will give a question, 2 questions from me or 3 questions from me. It's up to ISL, but I don't know whether if you manage to write 2 questions, but there are another 2 questions you have to write for the pass the exam. Okay, I think their minimum marks is 50. 1 question you are getting 25 marks, 4 questions. And I am wishing you all the best for the 29th exam. Hope, do you have any questions? Very sorry for the inconvenience. Okay. Do you have any questions? Hello.
No, sir, we don't have anything. But so when we answer the questions, do we need to clearly mention any that codes and the years and
No, nothing.
anything?
No need. I'm not expecting that thing. That means, let's say, maybe, let's say, out of 25, if you want to go beyond to 18, 20, that will give us some advantage. Okay, but let's say if you want to pass the exam, no need that kind of thing. Okay, but let's say, don't think only writing to. I think last time also I thought that's way majority of the students, they tried both to my questions, because I had to mark more than 300 question papers. Okay, that means I knew that other 2 questions, they were not tried giving more consideration, but they have put more consideration on both my questions. Okay, majority they did well, but anyway, I am telling you have to write all 4 questions. Okay, then don't think only writing two of my questions. I don't know whether the ISL will provide the 2 questions from my sections. Anyway, you have to prepare for the all 11 questions. Okay, then because 11 questions means you have to write 4 questions, because we don't know what, because they are asking every lecturer, resource person to submit the questions for the every part. Then ISL will select the questions. Okay.
Okay, sir. But I need to make sure with that when we ask the questions, we need to write the answer by the bullet point, and we just go through that. Is it okay for the answer, acceptable answer models?
No, when you are writing the bullet forms, because I am telling, if you are writing big paragraph forms, then you will try to explain 1 point more than the other points. That means, let's say, if you want to write, let's say, if the question is related, describe the main things in the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights, then let's say, if just I am telling an example, let's say it's a right to live. Okay, then if you without mentioning right to live in the bullet form, and if you want to expand that thing in paragraph form, you may write the right to live in a very big paragraph, and maybe other things. It's at least, to give you the 25 marks, you may need to write at least 10 to 12 items. Then if you try to write down all the things in very big paragraph, it may take 2 to 3, maybe 3 to 4 pages. Okay, and you may lose. And when you you have to manage the time as well. Then better put some bullet point and explain within, okay, maybe 2 to 3, maybe if you think 3 to 4 lines, and write down more items. Okay, but don't write to live, write to talk, write to work. That kind of way, don't write. Okay, is it okay?
Yeah, yeah, okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Any other things? Anyway, go through all 3 units. I think I have shared with ISL and hope you have received all my presentations up to now. Okay, then shall we close the session? Okay, thank you very much and have a nice day, and as well as wish you all the best.